Hi, Jeffrey.
Hi, Susan. How
Give
are
me
you
just a
doing?
second to join you up there on stage.
Okay.
Okay, hello. My apologies to you and everybody for running late is completely my fault. I think we know that COVID is starting to die down. If the infamous Southern California traffic is back and it is a nightmare, so my apologies. It took me an hour and a half to get like a 20-minute drive. So
Wow.
yeah, a little bit crazy. So just trying to get situated here. So give me just a sec.
Not a problem.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for your patience. And thanks, Jeffrey, for your flexibility. So, welcome, everyone. I'm taking a deep breath, you know, singing in the middle of 16 lanes of traffic, bumper to bumper. It's a little frazzling. But I'm glad we have a good conversation. The fifth in our Conversations in Race series with Jeffrey Blount. So, hello, Firesiders, and welcome. I'm Susan McBeth, owner of Adventures by the Book, and I'm your host today for our series Conversations in Race, which we have done a 5-part series on. This is part 5 of 5. It's been a real pleasure chatting with you, Jeffrey, and discussing issues of race through the characters in your book, The Emancipation of Evan Walls. And so, just a brief, I think a lot of you are returning, so I don't need to do a full blown bio of you. But, Jeffrey is an award winning author and a Emmy award winning television director with 34 years of experience working in the newsroom. And he's got children's books as well as an adult book, The Emancipation of Evan Walls, which is the one we have been discussing. And for those who are new and joining us, do you want to give them just a brief synopsis of the book again before we get started, Jeffrey?
Sure. This is a book about young Evan Walls who is wants to become educated, who's inspired to become educated, to make something of his life, and to try to do something that's a little bit above and beyond what most of the folks in 1968 Canaan, Virginia, African Americans have been able to do, and not in part, not just because they haven't been able to dream it, just because the situation in the country helped prevented them. So Evan um, would like to be more. He'd like to be somebody. And little does he know that his proclamation would cause him great trouble. It would put him on a pathway between two very different cultures, the dominant white culture in that southern town at that time, who thought of him as the uppity N-word, and he didn't belong with their students anyway. And then the shock to him is that his people in his own community thought that what he was doing, trying to become educated, was somehow color coded white, and that he was acting white, and therefore had to be pushed outside of his community and his culture. So this is the troubled road that this young man will have to struggle to find himself and to find his dream.
Yes, and so each week we've taken one or two characters and kind of talked about their perspectives on race and having a dialogue about that. And we do want to encourage audience participation, so you can invite yourself up on stage anytime. And I'm seeing that Fireside has a beautiful new uh,
Yes.
background, so it's nice. I had to get used to it for a minute, rushing in the door, but you still do the same thing. You still hit the button, the round button in the lower left hand corner of your screen, and hit invite on stage, and you can ask Jeffrey a question or make a comment at any time. So the first week we had a long conversation about the protagonist, little Evan Walls. Who Jeffrey described just a minute ago. And then the second week, we talked about his parents, because he was a pariah, not only in his own family with his own parents, but also in the white community. So we talked about that the second week. And then we talked about some of the characters. I'm trying to remember who we talked about in the third week. Uh, I don't
we
remember, but
talk,
then the fourth week, the last week, we talked about the two people who have been on his side all along and who've been his supporters and made it possible for him to get through a really difficult part of his life is Bojack and Mama Jenny. And we finished up that conversation last week. And so this week, we're going to talk about the last two characters we wanted to discuss, and that is Eliza Blizzard, who is a Black high school principal, who affects Evan's Walls and his trajectory as well. And then Patty Cunningham, his white girlfriend. So shall we get started with talking about Eliza? Because I think you mentioned her in the last session, introduced her a little bit. So do you want to tell us who Eliza Blizzard is and what she is to Evan?
Sure. Eliza Blizzard is we see her being spoken about on in the session, the porch session in chapter one, when Evan decides he wants to become someone, and you get a hint that there is this powerful woman out there who is a leader in the African American community, even though not everybody agrees that she should be leading them. And you get a hint that she has something that no one else has, and that is an education. Um, and as we move along, we find out that Eliza Blizzard not only has an education, but she has done her research and she knows how to use her education to create change in the community, and change for African Americans, to help better their situation. But that is controversial also, even within the African American community. But what she eventually becomes to Evan, the young character struggling to find his way, we've heard the phrase recently so many times: if you can see it, you can be it. And so there is this, in the midst of all of the fears that the Black folks in Canaan have about stepping into white spaces and integration and feeling safe, or whether or not they can actually compete. Evan is able to look at, and the reader is able to look at, this strong Black woman who has done what Evan hopes he can do: become educated and use that education to do something to help him. So she not only is the view of what he can become, but she also becomes another helper like Mama Jenny and Bojack, although to not that extent. But she does give him, helps him find pride in himself and the things that he does, and refers to him at some point as a soldier of the cause because of things that he's done unintentionally, but to move forward, the plight, or to lessen the plight of African Americans in Canaan, Virginia.
Yeah, and so how is she viewed by all the members of the community? Because we see that Bojack was viewed as this, antagonist, and he's stirring up trouble. And Mama Jenny was seen as, well respected because, she's a 90-year-old grandmother and she's been around a long time. But Eliza Blizzard is a little different, because she's not really, she's sort of part of the community, but she's out there in the bigger world
Right.
too. So how is she seen by the rest of the characters and perceived in the book?
Well, she's perceived in the book by the white community as trouble. And you see the result of that when the schools do integrate. She loses her job. She's and that's a response to, she's demoted. That's a response to who she is and the power that she's wielding. They're sort of putting some sort of sanction on her growth at that point. But then she just turns her power in another direction and keeps going. But within the African American community, she creates the same kind of, in a way, frustration that Evan does. Why do we need to be in schools with these white kids? Why do we need to try and prove ourselves against them? Why are you using all of your influence, whatever that is? And they don't exactly know where her influence comes from. They think it comes from someplace in the government up north, that she has this power, but the power is just in her intellect and being able to read the rules of the road and the laws, and to use them to her advantage. And so they are afraid that she is forcing them into uncomfortable spaces. And they have been able to live pretty much separately from white people in the town, other than having to, as Mama Jenny said, go to the stores or pay your bills or get your cars fixed. Once all that stuff, you can come home and you can be in the Black community, and you don't have to go to Black schools, and you don't have to deal with white people. So now, here comes this woman, this educated woman from the North, who's saying not only do we need to be in school with them, we need to be competing with them because it will provide things for the kids that they don't have in the segregated schools. So she creates a whole kind of a thunderstorm or a tornado in the town, and that's why I gave her the last name Blizzard because she's just tearing things up and pulling things up by the roots and throwing them away and saying we're going to go we're going to rebuild in a different direction. And when she walks into the church to say we're going to go to school in the fall, the schools will be integrated. You can see the reaction to the people in the church in the congregation. They're shouting her down. They're angry. They're afraid of the progress that she is laying out for them. But she's not having that either. That's how much power. That's how powerful she is. She's not having that. She's not worrying about what they're thinking and what they're saying. This is where we're going to go, and this is what's going to happen. Get on board. Evan needs to see that, and he can't absorb it all at once. He's 10 years old, and he's going through all these things with his kids. That's why I wait before I bring Eliza Blizzard into his life in a meaningful way. He's already gone through a lot of stuff. Bojack is already getting, and Mama Jenny are already kind of supporting him and pushing him along before this woman comes into his life and he's ready to accept what she has to offer. But she for me is it's an absolutely major character because of that phrase. You can be it if you can see it, and always she's there. And once he meets her and she becomes a part of his life, it's even more important. She's even more important. And we find out all the way to the end of the book that she then remains in his life and still has that kind of effect on him.
And why do you think it is that, everybody is afraid of the white person in this story, even Mama Jenny, who, is
Yeah.
this strong and influential and well respected. Excuse me, she even says that, she's afraid of white people. So what is it about Eliza Blizzard that makes her not afraid? Or is she really afraid and she doesn't show it? Is it her education? Is it her northernness? What is it about her that makes her not afraid?
Well, Frederick Douglass says education means emancipation, and um, Eliza Blizzard is free, and she is free as a free thinker. And as I said, she understands the laws. She understands how to use the laws to apply those laws in her to benefit her and her community. And you know, just the power of all of that is what she has that they don't have. And when I come from a small town like Canaan that I wrote, and when you go away from that small area where you feel limited, and the world is opened up to you, you learn, you become educated, you're able to now use reasoning that you never knew you had. All of those things give you self power to know what you can attempt to do. And that's what Eliza Blizzard has. And that's the strength that she has. When we become educated, we become, free to think and free to use our abilities in ways we never thought we could because we didn't know we had the power to do that. So that's the power of education, and it's another reason why when people read the book, they can see what Evan is beginning to realize that he's capable of. That's why why does he keep fighting? Why does he keep fighting? Because he sees the finish line. She's the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, and he's constantly looking at that. And particularly at a point in the book when she takes him to Hampton Institute and he meets all these other intellectuals, black kids who are walking around campus having arguments about math and and to see the Emancipation Oak, where these former slaves were taught by this woman who sat down 20 or so slaves and said anybody who wants to become educated, we'll start here, and they built this school right by that tree, which still is around today. So all of that power of education and knowledge rests with Eliza Blizzard. She walks around in the book with that flowing around her when she takes on the number one racist in the town. She outsmarts him because of she's got street smarts too. So she brings the total package to the table. And without that, I don't think Evan sees his way out. It's one thing for Bojack to tell him he can do it. It's one thing for Mama Jenny to tell him he can do it. Without having Eliza Blizzard in his life, making those changes and having her education be the power behind those changes she's able to make, speaks volumes to him.
Absolutely. And you referenced the Frederick Douglass quote that education means emancipation. And so, I think of your title, The Emancipation of Evan Walls. Now, I know a lot of times publishers choose titles. It's not always the authors who get to choose the title. So since we're using the emancipation word, I'd like to hear a little bit about the title. Was that your choice, your publishers? Did you have a discussion about it? And what was I think it's pretty obvious, but I just want to hear you elaborate on it a little bit.
Well, the title was that the publisher accepted the title without question. What happened? It was originally Crabs in a Bushel Basket. That was the title. And when Marley Rusoff, my agent, began to shop it around, that she felt like enough people didn't understand it. That they would look at the book and be confused by what the title meant. And so she asked that I come up with another idea before we went to more publishers with the book. So it took me about 2 weeks to come up with this. It looks like you could have come up with this in an hour, but I was trying to think about words that were appropriate to go with Evan Walls that would be really a word that would encompass all of what he was going through, and a word that could point to the hope he had at the far end of all of this. And whenever we think of emancipation, because of our history in this country, we think of it, of course, it means more than just the Emancipation Proclamation, but in the back of our minds, that is always playing there. When you hear the word emancipation, it's about freedom. Freedom from what? Freedom from struggle, freedom from people who have taken things away from you and taken away opportunity, freedom to live and breathe and see the world and do the things you want to do in the world without restriction. And in Evan's case, freedom to have the ability to be emotionally who I want to be, the freedom to dream unencumbered without somebody trying to steal and suppress my dreams. All of that is wrapped into the word emancipation. So there was a step in there where it left Crabs in a Bushel Basket, and then it was just emancipation. And we thought that was a little bit too cold. It didn't give, there was enough warmth to it. So then we added the name, The Emancipation of Evan Walls. When even if you don't know the person, when you see the title, you recognize that there's a human being there who's going through something. And so that's how the title came to be. And when it went to the publisher, the, we the only thing we didn't have any say about was the cover. The title they just accepted, and I'm happy they did.
Yeah, for sure. And since we're talking about kind of the production value of a book, the title, you mentioned why you named Eliza Blizzard the way you did, and so I'm curious because I'm always curious about whether authors, if there is a rhyme or reason why they choose particular characters' names. Are they names that just sound good, or that sound like that character, or is there a hidden meaning behind it? And so I think of Evan Walls and the walls that were put up for him. Was that intentional? Can you talk about your
Mm,
characters' names and if there
yes,
is any meaning behind them?
Eliza Blizzard is really the only character that has a meaning to her name. Um, the other ones, when I used to, John Irving is one of my favorite authors. And I read this article once about how he got some of his names from the phone book. so, so I tried doing that for a while. Then I just said, well, I'm just going to take them from my life. And, and the first thing they have to do is flow right. When I say them, they just have to feel right when they come out of my mouth. It just has to be smooth. And so I played high school football I played cornerback was my position. And when I was growing up, there was a cornerback playing for the Dallas Cowboys who was named Everson Walls. And Everson Walls played for the Cowboys, and then he went to New York and played for the Giants. And I just loved him. He's one of my favorite players. And when Gene and I had our first child, it was supposed to be, and well, we had two names. We had a girl name and a boy name, and the boy name was Evan. So I liked the Everson Walls. I took his last name, and then I took the boy's name that would have been the name for our first child and created Evan Walls. Mama Jenny was easy because there was a real Mama Jenny. So that was that. And Bojack is a really bizarre story, but my brother, one of my brothers was working at a summer camp as a camp counselor, and there was a kid who had hurt himself, and they were calling his parents, and my brother had asked him what his father's name was, and he said Bojack, and Brian said, really? That's his name. He said, I don't know. He might have another name, but everybody calls him Bojack. And I just remember my brother telling that story that night at dinner. And so that name always stuck with me, and I've always wanted to use it. So that's where Bojack comes from. Patty Cunningham comes from an article. I was reading an article, and the name just hit me. I just love the name, and that's how she comes. That's how she came in. So they just pop in many different ways and things from my life that make me remember certain things, or and as I say, there's a kind of rhythm I'm looking for. So in my mind, when people are reading it, there's like Eliza Blizzard, there's kind of a rhythm to that. So I look for those things. But she's really the only one whose name has some importance to it.
Okay, well, that's fascinating because you mentioned that. And the first character I thought it was Evan Walls. I thought there's so many walls put up from
Yeah,
for him in his life that I thought maybe there was some hidden meaning in that, but or not so hidden meaning, I guess.
yeah, yeah.
And you mentioned Patty Cunningham, and I'd like to transition over to her now. But I
Hmm.
do want to remind the audience that this is our last part 5 series, conversations in race, and we really want to hear from you. We want to hear, if you've attended some or all of the sessions, and what your thoughts are about what's been discussed, how you're feeling as we're discussing it, any experiences. We really do want to hear from you. So I encourage you to jump on stage and join us, because this is your last chance to do that. I want to hear if this was meaningful to you, what you got out of it, what you learned from it, if this is something you want to be hearing more of. So please come on up on stage, and we're gonna transition over right now to Patty Cunningham, who it was interesting because Eliza Blizzard was sort of represented some of that emancipation. Uh,
Right.
the school did, but Patty Cunningham also does. And so tell us a little bit about Patty and what role she plays in Evan's life.
Patty is in many ways like Eliza Blizzard, and I know that's a strange thing to think about, but she brings similar things to Evan's life. She educates Evan, and in a way that he's kind of embarrassed about. But this was real. And when I grew up, when I remember being told that there were black novelists who wrote stories that I never knew that. No one ever told me that. And I wanted to say that in the book. I wanted people to know that there were black kids being raised and all the way in high school and never really knowing that black people wrote those kinds of books. And people think about it now and they say, that's crazy. That can never happen. But it did happen because that's the only curriculum we had. We didn't, and we couldn't go into the library. So how would we know? So what Patty Cunningham does is two wonderful things that I wanted her to do in the book was to be another version of Eliza Blizzard. She was to show Evan a world that he didn't know existed, a world that he would also be excited about. And that was as she began to talk to him about African American writers and saying, I'm going to bring you this book. She, brings him the book Black Boy, which from Richard Wright, which was a book I carried around with me at school. It was like my second Bible. And whenever I would have these issues of, being told that you were white, you were acting white if you were intellectually inclined, I would read this book, and I had portions of the book dog-eared so I could get to the paragraphs that I needed to get to. It was almost like reaching for a Bible verse, because when something would happen and I would go to that and I would read that and I would say, okay, I'm not alone. There's somebody like me out there, and this guy, and he grew up and he wrote novels. He's a famous author. So Patty Cunningham brings that into Evan's life. Um, she shows him an eventuality. He doesn't become a writer in the book, but she shows him what Black people, another thing Black people can do. So you have Eliza Blizzard over here, the successful educator who's changing literally the changing their community and how their community, how they live within their community. And then you have this woman over here who is, she's only 16, but she's so much more worldly than he is, exposed to so many more things. And she is bringing him into that world and showing him possibilities. So here is a privileged, an ultra privileged white girl who is stepping into his life to show him that. Now, the second thing that Patty Cunningham is that I wanted for people to do, so to understand what could be more tense in the South than to have an interracial relationship. And so Patty Cunningham is the ultimate example of how Evan can see differently than folks on his porch. He has, because they have kind of forced him into a corner of not having friends and being alone, he is willing to open up his heart and mind to people who would like him, no matter who they were, just because he wants to be liked. And all of a sudden, this girl wants to hang out with him at lunch and talk about politics and talk about the world and talk about books. And he recognizes that everything he's been told, including some stories and some very powerful stories in the book about why he should hate white people, isn't exactly true. So now he has these two white friends, these boys, and he has, and they are there, but they are not, they don't reach in his heart the way Patty Cunningham does. And she shows him that she does not, she respects him for, as Martin Luther King would say, his intellect and his character. And while she acknowledges his race, because she's wanting him to be more in tune with his race, she doesn't hold that against him or look down on him because of it. And so it's the first example in the book of me as an author trying to say, this is who we can be as the great melting pot that we used to hear that phrase all the time, the great American melting pot. You barely hear it anymore. But that, in my mind, is Patty Cunningham coming into his life and him opening up to her is my so a little roadmap to say, in spite of all the racism that we see in this book, when we approach each other on a human level, we look at our humanity first, and we are drawn to the things that we love together, whether it's books or music or something like that. We can move past the barriers, and even though they never leave us, we can move to a place where we constantly recognize that we are better for all these different people in our lives. And Patty Cunningham's love for me as the author is the example of that happening in the book, and which is why there's a different reason personally, and if we have time, I can tell you that. But he ends up marrying a white woman. It has nothing to do with Patty Cunningham. It has something to do with his long-term arc in his life. But anyway, Patty is that model, and she continues to show him that as their relationship grows, they fall in love, they spend time together, and they take an unwise trip together, which leads to them losing each other. But all along that time, you just recognize, and even Bojack says their relationship taught him something. And he ends up being out in the woods in Evan's space with Patty and talking about race. And Patty asks him, "Do you hate me?" And he says, "No, I don't hate you." And she says, "Is it because of my relationship with Evan?" And he says, "Part of that, and part of it was getting to talk to you and understanding that I shouldn't be carrying this hate all the time for people because not everybody is worthy of that." So I think she's there for a small bit. My father says it was the worst part in the book for him when she walked away and out of his life. My father said it tore him apart. But that because I think it felt like that to my father because of the weight she brought into his life.
Mhm. Yeah, it was a really powerful part of the story, and the sad thing was is that she was open minded about a relationship with a black boy. Her parents were open minded and accepting and invited him over, which just was unheard of at the time. He couldn't believe it himself. I mean, he was suspicious about it as well. Like, is this really okay? And what are the neighbors thinking? And what
Well,
is everybody thinking?
that was when he went over to his friend's house to play basketball, right?
Yes,
And he
yes.
met and the mother greeted him at the door, and he referred to it as being one of the kindest moments he'd ever had in his life. And he, was he'd been told that that would never happen with a white person. And he even tells you how separate they were in the community because he said when she put her hand on his shoulder to guide him into the house very warmly, he said he'd never been touched by a white person except a doctor. And that's just amazing that you could live in a community and and never have that kind of never shake a hand, never know somebody well enough that you could have a hug. Is astounding. And so those just little tidbits of how we were forced to live apart from each other.
Yeah, and it's heartbreaking because this little boy, all these little boys, these little girls, everybody, they just wanted the same thing that everybody else wants. They want to be loved and to love, and they want an education, and they want to be happy, and they want to be successful. And it just is heartbreaking that the journey is so difficult. And I think that's what you did brilliantly is you showed us how difficult that journey is, even though those of us who haven't lived it couldn't possibly really understand it. You showed us as much as we're able to through your compassion and your words. And I think that's a really powerful message because how are we to understand it any other way if we're not experiencing it like you have? So,
Right.
thank you for doing that. So we have a way to do that. And that's another reason I really want to hear from the audience. I know that some people are shy about coming up on stage, but I would really like to hear thoughts on this discussion, conversations in race in general, your experiences either as a Black person or not as a Black person. And I see Kenyatta Berry in the audience, and I'd love it if she would come up too, because Kenyatta is an author as well, and she is the host of the PBS Family Tree Genealogy Roadshow, and she's got a lot of perspectives about the history of African Americans as well that she could share. But I do see that the Real has joined us up on stage, and he has joined us up on stage before. So welcome back. And did you have a question or comment for Jeffrey?
Well, first, I just want to say that I love the conversation, and I always love these types of conversations, and I just wish there were more of them. It's nice to hear people have an open discussion about touchy matters like this, and actually have some substance to the conversation without a whole bunch of controversy and all the nastiness that we encounter in the world today. Also, the last time I was actually on here, I had mentioned about the Wampanoag Indian,
Yeah.
and
Yes.
and I have done a little more digging on that. So, at hopefully at some point, Jeffrey, maybe we can get together and discuss that, or the three of us can get together and discuss it. It's a unique and very cool story, and it's very important to the history of this country. But
Well,
go ahead.
no, no, no. You go ahead.
One of the last things I wanted to say was. Um, there's so many identifiable points with what you guys are talking about. And for me personally, I grew up in the South. My best friend growing up was a black man. He and I were just inseparable. We were like brothers, and we still to this day we live miles and miles away from each other, but we remain friends. We still talk. We talk on Facebook. That's one of the only reasons I still have Facebook.
Yeah.
And he and I were there in that little town at a point when there was nearly a race war, and it really made it hard on our friendship.
Yeah.
And so I've seen it at that level, and that's something that I'm not sure, a whole lot of people I've ever known have got to see up close and personal, and it's just really so. But to still have his friendship all these years later, and then to hear the conversation I'm hearing and hear a lot of the stuff you're talking about with the book and everything is kind of taking me back to those days, and those are some of my favorite memories. But I appreciate you guys for the conversation. I really do.
Well, thank you for
No.
sharing that. I'm
Sure.
curious, did you ever have conversations about race with your friend?
Actually, we had to. We that was the unique thing for me up until this point. I never really. I know it sounds kind of cliche, but I never really saw color. You know, and what happened was a friend of my family had shot his uncle and killed him,
Oh my goodness.
Oh my gosh.
and it was a racial dispute between the two of them. And we were 14, 15 years old. And like I said, we were every day inseparable. I was at his house, he was at my house, whatever. And up until that point, I never had cause to even think, because my mother wasn't a racist person and she raised me to not see color. So I guess that's why I didn't. But when all this happened, there was kind of a line drawn in the sand, so to
Yeah.
speak. And even that year, they nearly called off the county fair because there was going to be, and there was a lot of trouble, and had to be a lot of heavy police action because of it. So that's when I started realizing, wait a minute, something's going on here, And so he and I hadn't seen each other for like a month. We were forbidden to go to each other's house, not because our parents had anything against each other, but simply because they were worried about our well-being. Because there was people in the black community that said, if we catch you here, we'll hurt you. People in the white community had told his family, if we catch you here, we'll hurt you. And it really was that bad for a while.
Oh, I
So
believe that.
so he and I were at school, and I had went to the guidance counselor, and I said, look, I miss my best friend, and I can't talk to him anywhere else, you know. So is there any way that we can talk during study period or something? And he said, as long as I'm there, I'm sure it'll be fine. He says, just a precaution in case any of the parents kick back or whatever. You know how that stuff always goes. So the guidance counselor, which I got to give him so much credit for it, he went and pulled him and pulled me during study period, and we actually got to hang out in his office and have a cold pop and eat some. I think it was chocolate donuts, which we probably shouldn't have had, but we got to sit there. We got to sit there and hang out and shoot the breeze. But the subject came up, and he actually, the guidance counselor, is the one who brought it up. He said, this should
Well,
in no way ever affect your friendship with each other. He said, this is what I wish we could see more in the community. So it was a good thing.
I hope you're right, because that to me is an amazing. If you don't turn it into a memoir, it's an amazing article
Right.
to read, because when I think of the struggles that Evan had to go through to maintain his friendships, and
Mm-hmm.
family members telling him that they'll never speak to him again, he'll never be part of the family again, and him having to say, but my friends didn't hurt you, so why are you asking me to give up my friendship? So that life story of yours is extraordinarily powerful. I think when we end up in these situations, particularly as children, and we're going through the trauma of all of a culture shock, which is what was happening when I went from going to segregated schools to integrated schools. Um, it was life altering. It was soul altering, and we had conflicts like that as well in the community. Conflicts like that in school. Um, I have, friendships of black kids that I've known since going to the segregated kindergarten, that I carry with me. But I also carry a friendship like yours, a 50-year friendship with Perry Nick Bell, who is my brother from another mother. And we are not only in Facebook, we talk all the time. We see each other. Um, when recently he lost his wife, and he was here when he was told by the doctors that she was not going to make it, and I was here for him, and my wife was here for him, but he was here with us when he could have been any other place. So those relationships are huge, and that, and I don't know about yours, but my relationship with him, I think, is almost closer because it occurred within the fire.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? With
Right.
all the stuff that going on around, you two found each other in the counselor's office, and Perry and I continued to find each other in the midst of all this stuff.
Well,
And it built an incredible relationship. And I think that the strange thing is we exposed each other, my friend and I, to different cultures. We were open to all kinds of people. So eventually, I would grow up to marry a white female, and Perry would grow up to marry a black female. And we would always get together and talk about, our wives. We would try to figure out, we must have hit our heads and they got wired wrong at some point.
well, one of the things that I'll say about that is, he and I have kind of that same kind of inside joke thing with each
Yeah.
other, because when we started hanging out, I had been on stage since I was 12 years old, and I grew up doing bluegrass.
Oh,
And so that's what, and I was singing bluegrass. Well, he turned me on to music like Percy Sledge and
yeah.
just a whole variety of different music altogether than what I'd ever heard. And he was the first one to sit down, because I remember it was so cool because he loved Muddy Waters.
Yeah.
And I'm like, who the hell's Muddy Waters? He said, well, you got to hear this. So
Yeah.
he and I just connected on music right off the jump, was one of the ways we became friends. So now, as I've gotten older and I can have more freedom to do and write the kind of music I want to, I do a lot of blues and maybe some Southern rock. And I'm going back to my roots a little bit with bluegrass and stuff, but I always think of him whenever I'm doing a Muddy Waters song or something, like, because he really did turn me on to that. And, but the other thing I was going to say real briefly is what probably hurt the most. And up until I was, let's see, I was 14 when all that happened, because it was the same year that my mom and my dad that raised me decided to get a divorce. So my whole world just came crashing down around me, and then all that happened in right in the middle of it. And I remember the most hurtful thing about all of it for me was, here was my best friend in the world, and his uncle had just gotten killed, and he was close to his uncle, and I couldn't even be there for him.
Right.
That was the part I remember. That was, and he and I to this day still discuss that, because it was rough. But he, like he always says, he said, it's just the fact I knew you wanted to be there. He said that mattered.
Right. Right.
So it's a blessing to have a friend that many years. And I always pick on him. I'm 6'2". He's really short. And I always wanted to play football and was too skinny. He always wanted to play basketball and was too short. So but anyway, I appreciate your time and appreciate you having me up.
Thank you
thank
for
you.
sharing your story.
And you can reach out to me actually via my website. There's a contact thing, and then we can talk. And also, if you don't mind me, my last name, you can see it spelled Blount, Blunt. My son Jake, Jake. If you look him up, he also plays bluegrass and old time music. So
Oh, really?
maybe there's some, yeah.
Well, we may have to have a show on Fireside.
Right. That's right.
So I know our time is winding down, but one last chance for any of our audience members to get up and share their thoughts or questions for Jeffrey. It's been a really meaningful 5-part session for me, Jeffrey. I appreciate your honesty and your candor and your talent in helping launch this conversation, which I think is much needed. I know that we didn't have these conversations growing up. I thought it was interesting when The Real was talking about his parents were very supportive of him having friends with whoever he wanted. And
Right.
you and I both grew up in a segregated world. And it was in high school that everything was desegregated, and we had our own experiences about that. My parents were not as open to that. And I'm sad about it. It made me feel uncomfortable, but it was a really awkward situation because, my parents, I was from a generation where you didn't challenge your parents. They told you, this is
Yes.
who you're friends with, and you don't buck them, even though in
Right.
your heart that something's not right about it. You're not going to defy them. And I remember in high school, when they started busing, and my best friend, who was white, started dating one of the black boys who was bussed in, and my parents actually forbid her from being my best friend. Now, what do you do with that when you're, a 16-year
Yeah.
child, really, and your parents tell you you can't be friends with your best friend because she's dating a black boy that they've never met and know nothing about? I mean, that's in our lifetime, Jeffrey. It just
Yes.
blows me
Yes.
away to think about that.
Yeah. Well, I was on a podcast recently, and I was saying, when someone meets me today and they shake my hand, all of that stuff is in the handshake. And, the whole history is there, and the composite of who I am, and how the world has shaped me and formed me. I was a little bit different in that my parents very much, because of their religious beliefs, would tell us that your job is to meet everyone, no matter who they are, with an open heart. But the minute they show you who they are, you react to them as need be. So if you try to be nice to somebody and they treat you as if they are racist, then you know what you need to do, and go the other way, and that sort of thing. And they taught us to have a feel for danger with regard to race, and I'm sure that that's a little bit what the reel was talking about. And because of conflicts in the town, you knew where you could go, who you could look at, what you shouldn't say, and all those things, and you knew those things very early in life. And so as a young child, you're carrying all of these crazy rules, about society, that, you look back on them now, it just seems so strange. But that's some of the things that I wanted to put some of that in the Emancipation of Evan Walls, so people could see the world in which Evan was trying to negotiate his path. See the world in many ways when I have conversations, to let people know that is a lot of the world that I grew up in, and that place existed. It is a, Canaan. I've added all some things to it, but the heart of that town existed in many southern towns, where there was this constant conflict of race. And I'm thankful for the change that we have made over time. But every time we think we have made it and we're moving forward, there's another George Floyd, or Ahmaud Arbery, or something that makes us recognize that we are not where we should be, but we have no choice but to keep moving forward. Otherwise, we will be in a society that none of us are going to be happy about. And I'd like to be I write my books, and I make my talks and speeches when I go around, with that in mind, because when I'd like to leave a world for my children and grandchildren that are focused on doing the right thing with regard to race, rather than the bad thing. And that's why I write books.
Absolutely. And the book is The Emancipation of Evan Walls. The author, Jeffrey Blount, award-winning author, Emmy award-winning television director of 34 years. It has been a pleasure and an honor speaking with you the last 5 weeks.
Thank you.
All for
Thank
you,
you, everybody.
Jeffrey. And if you want to click on Jeffrey's icon, you can follow him. So every time he is on Spotify, you can join in, and I hope you do come back, Jeffrey. I'd love to continue these type of conversations.
Yes.
We'll have to stay in touch and definitely do that. Thanks to our audience for being there every week, listening in. We appreciate you, and are glad you are available and wanting to carry on this conversation in race, which is really important. And we accomplished our goal, is not doing it just during 28 days of
February, right?
February. We made it into March. We're
Yes,
going
we
to
did.
continue that. So thank you again, Jeffrey. Thank you, everyone. And until next
Thank you,
time,
Susan.
what is your next adventure by the book? Thank you, everybody. Goodbye.
Bye.